Mike Migliaccio is co-founder and chief managing director of Dual City Investments, a real estate investment company that has holdings in multifamily, self-storage, hotels, and medical office. He co-authored a book called Missed Ops, where he talks about the importance of learning from the experiences of others so that you do not duplicate the same mistakes. I remember hearing many years ago that discipline weighs ounces, while regret weighs tons. And over time, I began to really think about the reasoning behind those that succeed versus those that don't. While we may not be able to boil it down to any single factor, I think everyone would agree that discipline is one of those critical variables. Having spent more than 20 years in federal law enforcement, Mike understands the importance of discipline. He learned very early on that simply writing down a goal is not enough. You have to have the discipline to see it through. And one small step you can take to developing discipline is showing up on time.
All right. Well, Mike, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here. I appreciate you having me on.
I'm really glad to have you joining us today. You know, Mike and I, we met, it was about 3 years ago in New York at a meetup that you held, and it was a real estate investment meetup. And Mike was really, really interesting. I mean, he still is, you know, and what's really interesting is his background. So Mike, why don't you just go ahead and tell our listeners a little bit about your background and how you got started in real estate?
So my interests in real estate go pretty far back. I'm currently in law enforcement, and I'm about to wrap up about a 23-year career in law enforcement. But my roots in entrepreneurship and especially in real estate go back to my high school days. I actually had a landscaping business with my brothers, and that got us in the real estate field, I guess you could say. Or, you know, my thought process was directed towards real estate because we were working on houses, we were doing some light construction work, and we were in a lot of different neighborhoods. So we actually set a goal, myself and my brothers, and we put a legal pad up on our bedroom wall, and we wrote down the goal of purchasing one house a year for the next 10 years. I'd say that was probably around 86, 87, 1986, 1987. And we wrote the goal down just like all the experts tell you, you know, focus, write it down, visualize. And then we neglected to take the next step. And we never purchased any real estate. So fast forward to one of my stages of law enforcement. I was working with the FBI and in a strike force. We were working money laundering cases where I met my current partner, Keith Nelson, and he and I got together and we wrote a book about missed opportunities. And one of my missed opportunities was purchasing real estate. So actually, here's a quick visual of the book.
Oh, nice.
And that actually brought me back to the thought of buying real estate. In addition to that, one of the other agents in one of my squads had asked me if I wanted to buy real estate. He actually was in the process of collecting an inheritance, and he wanted to do something. He was also somewhat entrepreneurial. So one thing led to another, and that got us into looking at real estate. Now, Keith had actually left the job, moved to the Carolinas, and he saw that his area in South Carolina, the Greenville market in particular, was blowing up. And by that, I mean that there was a lot of growth in jobs, a lot of growth in movement from the Northeast, for example. And he could see on the streets conversions of like gas stations and rundown buildings into restaurants and shops that people were interested in being out in town, spending money. So one thing led to another. We actually looked at several different other asset classes before getting into what really got us established. So we looked at mobile home parks, we looked at fix and flip like most other people, and we looked at Section 8 housing portfolios, but we never pulled the trigger on any of those. So We found a realtor that was about as aggressive as any realtor that we had seen in the Carolinas. And she found us an on-market 12-unit multifamily that seemed to be fairly priced. So we pulled the trigger. We got 6 of our friends and family together. 2 of the guys actually were working with me in my job. One was one of my friends from high school. It was myself, Keith, and then Keith's cousin. And we chipped in from savings, and we bought our first property. We looked in the same area and found another deal, and we purchased the second property, second multifamily. And we were kind of off to the races from there. We were learning like everyone else. We got into probably the same asset class that most people would look to start with when they get into the commercial side from the residential, and that's multifamily. But from there, we continued to grow.
So this first 12-unit multifamily property, what exactly was that deal like? Like, what was your plan going into that property?
Good question. We had a little bit of a different view within our group. Most of us thought about buying and holding. One of the challenges with that was that it was a small property. The efficiencies are not necessarily there with a small property as far as management costs and maintenance on the property, as opposed to owning something that's a little bit larger. So we had actually made a mistake in that first property by locking into a rate that we thought was phenomenal at the time, and it was with a small local bank. That property, well, again, some of us had a vision of holding that long term, so we locked into like a 15-year fixed loan on that property. One of us, Keith, who was, again, my other main partner, he felt like, hey, if we're in this property for more than a short period of time, we're probably doing something wrong. So one thing led to another, and after purchasing the second property, ultimately we ended up getting an offer on both of those properties, and we moved through them. So I was always of the mindset to buy and hold, appreciate, pay down the mortgage. Keith was, and again, having been in the business there, because he ended up getting his license along that path, he saw some things that I didn't really see on a day-to-day basis when I'm working with investors and he's working in the street trying to find properties and working with realtors, et cetera. But he saw the growth. I didn't see the growth in New York on the streets like he did in South Carolina. So he says, hey, if we're in this property for any longer than a short period of time and we're not moving through it, taking some appreciation and then capitalizing on that, moving into a larger property, we're probably doing something wrong. So we differed in our initial viewpoints, and then we all came together and decided, hey, we're going to keep growing and moving into larger properties. Again, that was a C-class property, so we wanted to move more towards the newer, a little bit more conservative classes as well, which we ultimately did.
And so from that, after that second deal that you had, you guys went on and invested in another multifamily as well, or?
After the second one, we did move into a larger multifamily. We also purchased a self-storage. We had 400 plus units. The third multifamily that we owned, I believe, was like 64 units. I think that was our third property. And we continued to grow from there. Ultimately, we moved into another one that was a 100-unit turn, larger, self-storage, and then ultimately moved into where we are now, which is creating a fund. We've had building lots, Class A office, et cetera.
Yeah, so let's talk about, going that transition into the self-storage and some of these other assets and the thought process behind that, because you guys essentially, you got your start in multifamily. So
Correct.
Why transition into self-storage?
That may have happened by chance. We had a contact that was in the local market in South Carolina that was passing up on our first self-storage. And I'm very thankful for that because that was a phenomenal property. We ended up moving through that in probably about a year and a half or so, I think it was. And the returns were 70, 80%, maybe even more than that. So that was probably more by chance than anything, in that, again, someone brought it to us and said, hey, I'm not going to pick this up. If you guys are interested in it, why don't you take a look at this? So we did. The numbers looked good, and we ended up purchasing it.
So the self-storage play, and especially for the people that aren't really familiar with it, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. It's I'm not sure where to start with that question. It's a solid asset class, and it's been growing. And I think it probably varies from location to location, because there's some places like the South Carolina market where a lot of people don't have basements. Now, we know traditionally people like to store things. In New York, they're all over the place. South Carolina, they're all over the place, and it's a growing asset class. It has some benefits and it has some challenges, just like any other asset class. But there's no toilets. There's, the tenants pay generally up front. Credit card every month, something along that line. And you can do some things to be creative, to get some more traction for your location. We've done a lot of marketing in that location. We didn't have like a U-Haul or a moving company associated with it, so we brought that on. We were actually in a relatively remote location, and we had looked at doing some other things like putting a cell site antenna on that space. Unfortunately, there was one that was a little bit too close. So we were looking to do things creatively to maximize our income there. And we put a minor repair and upgrade program in place where we painted the whole place, made sure the parking lot was spotless, and we did a phenomenal job. It was I never really thought that paint could bring so much value to a property, but it really did a phenomenal job.
Do you find that the self-storage units are challenging to lease, or are they quite simple to lease?
I think that also depends on location. We're currently in one that's underperforming, but when we purchased it, by all of our metrics, it looked like it should be one of the better performing properties. And I think, like any other asset class, if you're not really on top of it, and I think size really does come into play. If you're a smaller unit where you're in that mix where you don't have enough traffic or enough volume from the individual property to have a full-time manager, then you have to be on top of that. You have to act as the on-site or full-time manager. And if you're not doing it on a regular daily basis, just like anything else, then I think you will see results subpar to what your expectations would be.
And aside from self-storage, I know that you guys have also invested in other things like hotels, I think it was as well.
Correct.
Yes. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. We have a boutique hotel up in Lake Placid. It's right on Mirror Lake. Beautiful location. I prefer palm trees and sand, but the first time I went up there, it was in the spring of 2018, and I couldn't believe just the views and the weather, just gorgeous. We are right on Mirror Lake, so we can walk out the back door and walk 20 feet and you're on the lake. This property was found by one of our partners and one of the original 6 members of our group. He and his father had owned a hotel in the east end of Long Island. They owned it for a number of years, exited the property, did very well. Because of the expertise that they brought to the team and the experience that they had with hotel ownership, we were able to take advantage of that and locate a hotel that was being marketed in a good area, and then also to capitalize on negotiating for the deal and then managing it. I would say that because we work a little bit differently, we look at an asset first. And then we'll look at the area and we'll say, hey, if we like this asset, then we'll do some due diligence on the area and see if the area has the potential. This is a destination, so it does very well in the summer and the winter. People go up there for a number of different events, whether it's Ironman, horse show events, hockey events, winter skiing, leave changes, all those different things that people love to get outdoors with and go to this location.
So throughout your business here, what do you find to be some of the biggest challenges that you've come across?
Um, Personally, I would say because I am still employed, um, I have time management as a constant challenge. That is one of the toughest things, is to prioritize. And we're going through a crisis right now where everyone's home, but I have elderly parents. My mother's not healthy, so I help take care of them. I'm taking care of my family, still working, and I hate to even say it, but just to go grocery shopping, I've been designated to do the grocery shopping. It could take 2 to 3 hours on a regular basis, and you couple, taking care of the family, working, building the business, and then just try to get any relaxing time at all in there. And time management, I think, is my biggest challenge. I think you have got to be very disciplined. You have to set goals, you have to set schedules, and you have to stick to them, and you have got to take action. I think that's probably one of the biggest things that I recommend to people is if you write something down, schedule it out, and just stick by it, and put the plan in place and execute.
So on this topic of time management, because that does seem as though it's a big challenge for a lot of people, especially there are people out there that, like you said, they are still working full time and investing, and then they have families and things. So, and oftentimes too, I hear that from these people, they say, "Well, I don't have time to actually go out and invest in real estate," but at the same time, they want to develop a second stream of income, right?
Mhm.
So it's almost it's basically a conflict right there, because they're not going to set aside the time or devote the time needed to develop the passive income, and therefore they're not going to have the passive income. So how do you if you're that person, you're experiencing this situation, how would you suggest to these people to budget their time, to schedule properly, to develop that discipline that's necessary to take the steps to move them forward?
So that question hits home, particularly for me, because when Keith and I got together and wrote a book, it's called Missed Ops, and it's about missed opportunities again. And one of the chapters is called American Idolized. And I don't know if you remember the show American Idol, but Keith and I were getting together weekly. Every Sunday night, we would review what we did during the week and set goals for the following week. As I'm doing that, my wife and kids are sitting on the couch watching American Idol. And I said, the people on that show are achieving their goal, and they're seeing their dreams come true, right? Because they wanted to get a shot at singing and being recognized, etc. So it's great to have time to relax and spend time with your family, and that's critical and it's paramount. But you've got to find out within yourself where your goals are and prioritize them. And time management, again, it comes back to that, where you've got to set priorities, and they can change a little bit. I think they can be fluid. We're in a different situation now where, I've got to put my parents' health and taking care of them as one of my priorities. And that changed a little bit because I had more help from my siblings prior to this, this virus. But I think people have got to look at themselves and say, look, if I'm going to spend some time watching XYZ show, I won't name any other shows, but you've got to say, how important is that relative to spending time achieving your dreams and your goals, meeting your goals. So I think that's probably the most important thing. It's like when people talk about a budget, they'll say, how important is it for you to go out and spend X amount on a coffee when you go into a higher end coffee place? Or, can you make that coffee home for a fraction of the price? And you have got to think about what your goals are, and then how to replace what you're doing now with some action that will help you get closer to achieving your goals. So I think you've got to prioritize your time, and again, it's okay to have some time to rest and to relax and be with family. I think that's critical, because nobody knows what's going to happen tomorrow, and if God willing, we're going to be here. But I think that's one of the most important things. And again, that's one of the things we wrote about years back before we even got into real estate.
It's interesting that you mentioned the television, and it almost seems as though like a lot of people, when they get off work and in their mind and they say, oh, you know, why I should do this, I should do that, but the first thing that a lot of people do is just go home, sit on the sofa, turn on the TV. And I'll never forget the story. I heard this, it was about, oh man, maybe like almost 20 years ago. And this is when I was actually in high school at that time, and I was working with a direct sales company. And the founder of the company, I knew him, and his name was Michael Jackson, actually, but not the entertainer Michael Jackson. But I'll never forget the story that he told us. He said that he finally reached a breaking point one day when he came home from work, and the very first thing that he did was he sat down and would turn on the TV, and he realized that was it was habitual for him. And he said, you know, if I really want to change my life, I need to change this habit. I need to let this go. I need to dedicate this television time to doing something that's more productive. So he grabbed a pair of scissors and cut the cord. Granted, he unplugged it first. Granted, he unplugged it first, but he cut the cord to the TV, and that was kind of very symbolic for him and a turning point. And that's when he really began to dedicate that time after work to learning, lots of reading and whatnot. So, you know, speaking of that, now, so we know that we should do these things. Okay. So how do we move ourselves from just knowing that we should do these things? We know that we should dedicate some time to our own growth. So how do we move from that into the action point? Because like you said before, you and your brother, you wrote down that you guys wanted to purchase a house a year.
Mm-hmm.
And you knew that that's what you should do and what you wanted to do, but that didn't come to be.
So I'm not going to create something new here. I'm going to go with what works. First thing is a mentor. We wrote a book about learning from other people's experiences, and sometimes history repeats itself. You can look at your actions previously, you can look at other people's actions and say, what did that person do to accomplish their goals? I think, you know, that's just a tried and true process that people go through. You have a mentor, you have somebody that you're accountable to. It could be taking on partners. You know, when Keith and I wrote our book, we did it over about a 1.5-year time period, and we set a goal to meet every week, Sunday night, to review what we did the prior week and then set new goals. And it was okay to not get everything done or to miss some of our goals, but as long as we were accountable to each other, it gave us the drive. It wasn't that you were doing it necessarily only for yourself. You might have been doing it for somebody else. And sometimes that gives you just enough spark to stay true to the goal. I would say the other thing that is critically important is take small steps. Because if you look at a goal of anything, whether it's losing weight, whether it's paying down debt, whether it's hitting a net worth of X, you generally can't do those things overnight. But you have to set much smaller, immediate goals that you can accomplish today. If your first goal is to, Rocky was on the other day, and I see Rocky the first time that he was preparing or you're training to fight Apollo Creed, he's up at whatever time in the morning, cold, dark winter day, but it was the first day. And I think you have to take that first day and you have to say, okay, what am I going to do today? Not long term. What am I going to accomplish today? And I just need to get today under my belt. If it is getting up early, it's not that painful, but it is the first step to building a habit. You have to start with the first step. A lot of people say, how do you eat an elephant? Well, it's one bite at a time. So the same thing, I believe, is critically important to achieve goals. If you have got to learn something, you just talked about education and reading. I read very slowly. attention with all the things going through your head is critically important, but very difficult. So just take one paragraph at a time, take one page at a time, take one chapter at a time. I think those things are, without that, it's extremely difficult to accomplish anything.
I think that's a very poignant point. And when I think back just on my own, reflect on my own personal life and the things that I've been through, like take, for example, I used to struggle a lot with my weight. And I mean, it's always been an ongoing struggle for me. And I would say even to this day, but the one thing that I know that I can do is if I were to gain weight, I know very confidently that I can lose weight and get my weight back down to where I want it to be. And I mean, I've done that so many times. And one of the biggest things that I've found that is really helpful, and like what you said just now, is just focusing on the day. So I'm going to focus on today. Even though I may have a 90-day plan or 180-day plan, I'm not going to focus on 180 days out from now, because if I do, that's very discouraging. I'm not going to focus on the 90 days. I'm only going to focus on putting in my time in accomplishing my tasks for today. And what I found that to actually be really, really helpful for me to, get my weight down. And I think that, like you just said, that does uh, translate quite well into just starting, a business and getting into real estate and investing. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll give you an example of something that we accomplished as a family going through this crisis. Everybody was home, and I said, "Listen, God forbid we, contract the virus, but barring that, I said we should come out ahead of this because everyone's home better than we would have if this didn't happen. We have time now, and there's zero excuse." So we had, like most families do, accumulated some things in the basement. We went down and started with one day, and we took a little bit at a time, but you start seeing the progress. And when you're completing that or achieving that goal, completing that task, it's an amazing feeling. You say, wow, I really feel good. And then that can be momentum to build on your next or larger goal. And that is really, self-esteem, where you say, I actually was able to achieve that goal. So you write it down, you set very simple, scheduled steps, and then as you achieve them, it helps you to continue to build larger and more challenging goals.
So let me ask you this. You mentioned earlier as well, discipline, because this is going to take a lot of discipline. How do you feel that your experience in law enforcement has helped you from the discipline standpoint? And what is that discipline like that they developed in these types of organizations?
Um, so discipline for me comes back probably to when I was a child with my father. He used to come into the bedroom and whistle and wake us up, and we didn't want to get up. But we built a landscaping business where everything we did in that time period, we did it 100%. We worked very hard. We were up at 6:30 in the morning. We couldn't start legally working until about 8 a.m., but we'd work for about 12 to 14 hours a day. And then we would go out, at night. We were younger guys, and we would go out at night until maybe 4 o'clock in the morning, get up and do it again the next day. And, most people would say you're crazy, but you build habits, again, of building, a discipline. In the academies, I remember them teaching us 15 minutes early as being on time. It's not that you're on time. It's not that you're a couple of minutes late or even a couple of minutes early. It's 15 minutes early as being on time. So, also practicing your habit, it can build a discipline. So most things that we're trying to accomplish, if they were easy, we would have done them already, right? So staying true to working out, staying true to dieting, staying true to doing a little bit of work every day, and maybe scheduling it, picking a time where you set aside in your schedule in your day, I'm going to do something every day at this time, whether it's read, maybe it's at 5:30 in the morning, you get up early, but you'll build a habit, and then you'll build that discipline. So, I think my discipline has come back to my childhood with my father, and then I had my older brother was my mentor, and he was very instrumental in me becoming what I am today, and having achieved a lot of the goals that I had.
So yeah, so it seems as though this discipline, when I'm thinking about it, as you're speaking, it's actually really critical. And you think that, I guess, a lot of the failures that people have experienced, usually it boils down to lack of discipline, maybe. Would you agree with that statement, or?
Um, well, look, I'll say this. On a positive note, if you failed at something, at least you tried,
Mhm.
right? So I don't think failure is necessarily the worst thing in the world. It's not what we were shooting for, but at least it shows that you tried to do something. The biggest challenge is not going back and trying to accomplish it again, or trying to accomplish or take the next step. I think that's the biggest thing. So that could be discipline, in that you have to set realistic expectations, and you have to know that there's going to be challenges. You have to know that there's going to be struggles. But you have to say, I'm going to take those as part of the journey. A lot of people say, enjoy the journey. That's not always easy. Trust me. I mean, I know. And I know most people, they know the same thing. They've been through it. But it's relatable because we're all the same. We're all come from the same cloth, and we all have the same challenges. I mean, we might have different challenges, but generally speaking, we have the same challenges. So I think discipline is critical in the sense that you've got to, like we said before, set your goals, write them down, take a little, step at a time. And then if you do have a failure, you need to say, that's okay. That's part of this journey. I'm going to just keep going. It's being disciplined to keep going, and not just folding and giving up to that challenge or struggle. If you look at stock charts, there's a lot of times where technicals come into play, and stocks hit a certain level and they fall back. They hit a certain level and they fall back. And the second, third, maybe fourth time they break through it. Now that level that was resistance becomes support. So anybody that knows anything about looking at stock charts, they'll understand that. And in the sense that we're talking now, we can build momentum off of that success of breaking through that point, and that's part of the discipline.
So what advice would you have for new people that are looking at investing in real estate?
So a lot of people spend money on courses. I think that could be great. I think it could be a challenge. You've got to do your homework and make sure that if you're going to work with somebody, I do think a mentor is a great place to look, and somebody to find that you can bounce ideas off of. One of the things that we've done is periodically we've taken somebody in, as far as kind of tutoring them, and we've worked with some people, and I think that's critically important to give back a little bit. But I would say start with small goals, realistic goals. Find somebody to work with, even partner with, that you can be accountable to, and then having a mentor where you can look at what they've done. And what we write in our book is, experience is the best teacher as long as it's someone else's experience. And we write that because we believe that a lot of the things that you don't want people to do are things that most people can follow those steps. So you can't necessarily be exactly the same as someone else and do what they've done, because your strengths might be different. But a lot of times the pitfalls that have hindered them or setbacks for them, you can avoid those to shorten up your steps to achieving your goal, or your path to achieving your goal.
And for a book recommendation, could you just tell us about your book again, and show us the book too? And where can they
Sure.
find it?
Misstops, and it's on Amazon. We've got some copies if anybody's interested. We can actually get it to you via our website. And if you don't mind me just giving that out real quick, it's dualcityinvestments.com. So somebody can go on there and download the book. But if you ever have any challenges with that, just give me a call or send me an email, and we can get you a copy of it. There are some other really great books as well. I think one of my favorites is Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People. I think that's a great people skills book. And it's really, a lot about listening. And yeah, I think that's one of the better books, if not one of the best books, one of my favorites.
And how can people get in touch with you?
Mike at dualcityinvestments.com is my email. You can also go to the website. You can see a little bit about myself and my partners and what we've done historically. Yeah, it's probably the best way.
Well, thank you, Mike. I really appreciate your time today. It's been a pleasure.
Dion, it's been great knowing you. I appreciate your time as well and having me on the show, and look forward to a bright future together.